Good afternoon, Dana.
Good afternoon.
And friends, a very good evening to those of you who are watching from India. And perhaps it's, I think, too early to say good morning, but who knows? The other day we had somebody from Hawaii. So if somebody is watching from the US or anywhere in the world, our deep, deep greetings to you all. Thank you for joining your energy in this event. I'm Dr. Aditya, and with me is Dr. Amit. We are both speaking from Pune, and we'd like to welcome Dana, you who are coming from Italy right now.
Yeah, this is
And
a
thank
truly international venture.
it is. And I have to say, this is the most fitting backdrop that one would expect in an art, a conversation with an artist. And one of my questions today, which I was hoping will come somewhere in the middle, but I'll let it out, you might say, for all our listeners, is the importance, friends, of colors in our rooms, in our surroundings, especially when we think of healing. What does it do? So, Dana, you've answered that question just by that setting, but we'll also go in more detail as we start.
Yes.
So, Dina, now thinking of healing our emotions, and through the process of creativity, I'd like to ask you first, uh, how would you define creativity? Because often we have a block right there. And secondly, why is creativity important? You think it may not be the first thing that strikes a person who is trying to heal themselves from something.
hmm Well, I'm going to give an explanation of creativity that comes from my decades of working with it. And essentially, what I've found is creativity is really in a spectrum towards what the yogis and masters called super consciousness. Because what it is it's actually getting ourselves opened to the flow of energy that is always available and always trying to happen through us. So it's really a quickening to our higher nature, an opening of the aperture to the divine consciousness that can flow through us, that's full of vitality, full of life, full of ever new joy, ever new possibility. And in many ways, it's like a childlike state. I mean, obviously, all healthy, happy children are innately creative. They make forts and play games and put on costumes. And one minute they're a policeman, and the next minute they're an angel, and then they're, in seconds they try on different identities and different realities. They're a fluid with letting possibilities move through them. And yes, it's play, but as we go older, we often close down. And so we think this is what's possible, and we constrain ourselves to very narrow parameters. Creativity is simply opening the aperture so that divine flow can move through us unobstructed. And when that happens, it makes us creative in the sense that we kind of normally think of, like, oh, they're a creative cook. They think of new spices. They're a creative artist. They make colors move together beautifully. They're creative in their business. They come up with new ideas. But it's also allowing the vitality and life force energy to pump through you like the heart pumping blood. And that is intrinsically healing. So that would be my answer.
So, thank you for mentioning some of those examples towards the end, because often, again, one wonders that how do I be creative? And you mentioned some of those areas in our lives. But could you also share a little bit more in detail, like what kind of healing might happen if somebody taps into creativity? And then how does one, let's say, a little bit more specifically, be creative? Because we see some people and we say, for example, I have known you for years, seeing your paintings, your work, the setting you've just created. I've been to that studio, but I can't place where this is right now. So there's a lot of creativity. So I could say, oh, Dana is always creative. But how does one become creative? And what are the different healings that might happen? You could enumerate a few.
So, creativity is actually intrinsic to all human beings, and it's native to human beings. So the good news is it's actually quite easy to recover the state of creativity, and that it's a state of consciousness. It's a way of being. It's an experience of fluidity and flow and openness. So what happens, I'll just give you an example of what happens in my classes here often. People come for the first time and they come in and they're very nervous and their bodies are kind of stiff and tight. And they're like, I'm not creative and I haven't drawn since I was in second grade and I can't draw or whatever, and you can just feel sort of the tension, but you can feel underneath it, the soul's longing to connect to that vitality and to that capacity to flow forth from inside out, the expression of the soul. And so what we do here is we do very gentle, easy warm-up things that just get you out of your brain, your mental thin sliver of reality that is chatty and monkey mind, and into a way of being that's very much in the present moment. In that present moment, you start to feel relaxed and the body becomes more fluid. And as that happens, like the whole system comes alive. And so that's why it's so directly related to health, because the body itself comes into a relaxed, open, flowing state. And so do the emotions. So the emotional realities also open up and are freed from places where they tend to get either frozen or stuck or blocked. We're not, as a culture, taught how to process our emotions. And so we tend to either introject them or project them, and we don't learn how to express them in ways that are healthy and wholesome. And so these things happen amazingly. Like, to me, it's miraculous, but it's also predictable that within half an hour of doing some of these exercises, people are in that state. And what happens is that opens the channel for whatever it is that you're doing. So for instance, after one of my classes, this person sent me 2 or 3 months later a book in the mail. And they said, here is my finished book, which I had been working on for 10 years, and I was stuck and I couldn't finish it. And after painting, I was able to finish that book. And so it's not about the act of painting, like we're all going to become painters or you're going to be an artist. It's about letting yourself do a process that opens that flow. And so it can really be applied to any aspect of your life, because it's about, are you closed, tight, nervous, tense, inhibiting the vitality of life force, or are you open, fluid, responsive to that? And in the moment, in the present moment, creativity is very powerful practice for bringing us completely into the present moment.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Dana, as you pointed, because just yesterday we had a wonderful talk with Dr. Amit Goswami, who is a physicist, and he comes from a background of quantum physics, and he was sharing, some of the modern research which has actually come in the last few years, and how the point exactly that you're mentioning, that when the prana is not flowing, when the prana is constricted, or let's say it is not allowed, the flow of the life force is not happening. So he was giving the example of those women, somehow those who were keeping the grief in their heart, maybe because they became a widow at an early age or because of some other reason. And the scientists studied their cases and they found that the cancers, like especially the breast cancers, were very common in them. And they found out that it was because the breasts are also getting the energy from the heart chakra, and they symbolize the nourishment and the bond between the mother and the child. So it is very interesting, but I'm also curious as a physician that in last few years, I was reading these books by Dr. Bernie Siegel, who is an American surgeon. And at one point I studied his work, and he said that in his career, he started diagnosing problems in his patients on a deeper level by just asking them to make some paintings and drawings, and a wonderful way of assessing them. And he actually took it a step forward, and he could see sometimes that although he was a surgeon, but because he was able to get to the root cause of illness, sometimes surgery was not necessary, and he was able to heal them by non-surgical measures. So would you be able to share something on the ongoing research and maybe Dr. Bernie Siegel's work, if you had come into contact with?
Yes, yes. Actually, I'm familiar with Dr. Bernie Siegel and also um, uh, Amit Goswami. So both of those are very relevant. And interestingly, at one point, I worked with an association in America called the Women's Physician Organization, and they had me come and present because what's so fascinating is that it really does. The psyche wants to communicate. Our heart and our soul and our deeper being want to communicate, but we don't often allow it. And when we do, so much information comes out. And so it's true that if you just give yourself a little bit of an opportunity to draw or express something that's happening on the inside, it can actually serve as a very powerful mirror of what's happening, and it mirrors the deeper level of it. And physicians are often they have a great body of knowledge to draw from, but there's often many possibilities, in the diagnosis moment. Like it could be this or it could be that. And the drawing process can bring to light really what's happening. And so let's say you ask a person to draw what they're feeling in their body. It's not about representing some accurate picture. It's just like, here's a squiggle of my body, and here's where I feel the pain, and here's where I feel the tension, and I choose this color for expressing that. At a glance, you're actually able to really see the internal perception and the deeper reality of what's happening. And so perhaps in that, you're able to see into the diagnosis, not cutting off the deep knowledge that the doctor has from their training, but adding to it something that's coming from the patient, that's expressing an information that's deeper and higher than the conscious mind. And so it allows the diagnosis to be very noetic, to have the full spectrum of consciousness and ways of knowing and being, and can sometimes be giving incredible clues to what's happening in the situation with the person that they don't even know themselves or would not be able to put words to. If they could say it, they would. But I also did a lot of art therapy with adolescents years ago, and I have worked as an art therapist. And it's so different sometimes what our mind wants to say about something and what the heart and soul and psyche and being have to say about something. And creative process allows that language to come forth and to be spoken in a way that gives visibility to very deep inward realities that you otherwise cannot see and don't even know about in your conscious mind necessarily. But in the classes, for instance, when people are working, they'll create things and go, oh, and realize something about themselves. That's what we're really doing. We're in a process of self-revelation and self-discovery. And you can see things and experience them deeply that we're not able to penetrate the defenses of the ego and the mind.
I'm glad that you are sharing, Dana, that subject, because in Dr. Siegel's work, this reminds me actually of a story at one point, what he's sharing from his clinical practice, that there was one patient, who was being planned for giving this chemotherapy because of some cancer. But he wanted to see, and that is how he used to assess his patients, like what category of patients will do well with chemo or maybe a radiation therapy. So he just asked him to draw whatever his mind is, thinking of, whatever thoughts were coming to his mind. And what he drew was very interesting, that he drew a patient on a bed and in a caricature, and there was this drip, the IV infusion, intravenous drip, which we always see by the side of the patient, and the medicine is going into his vein, but the color he used to point out that medicine which is going on in his vein was black. And so then the other patient, which was another patient, he did the same trial and he gave him a picture to draw. But in this case, the color he used in the medicine was actually golden yellow. And now with these two colors, he said, because that color he used was black, so he analyzed that he is not very receptive to chemo because he sees this as a poison to his system, and so it will not be a very wise decision to treat this cancer of this individual with the chemotherapy, whereas the other person who was receptive, where he was using a golden yellow color, would be, very receptive to the chemo. And this exactly happened, that in his due course of the follow up, that patient became very well with chemo. So my question to you is that if you could throw some light on the colors, if the patients are using, let's say, if as an artist, if as a doctor, if I have to, do the same thing, can we analyze the mental state of the patient by the choice of the colors that he's using in his paintings?
Yes, and I will definitely respond to that. And I also wanted to just respond to what you were saying about Dr. Siegel's example too, because it makes me think of something that I find in this work that's important, which is that we can diagnose and receive information from what we create, and we can also use the creative process to penetrate into our psyche and give positive information. I actually had cancer many years ago when I was 29 years old, and I read his books at that time and worked with his information and also the information from Dr. Carl Symington and others who were talking about visualization and the healing power of being able to imagine things. And so there's two different avenues here. There's the avenue of receiving and gathering information, and then there's the avenue of using the creative process and color and light and imagination and visualization to heal. So when I was going through chemotherapy, I actually always visualized the chemotherapy as light coming into the body and dissolving the cancer and lovingly washing it away. And many other examples I could give you, but I had fourth stage cancer spread to the liver and limb system with a 5% chance of survival. And I used many of the techniques of this kind of approach to heal. And so I just wanted to put that out because I think it's an important part. But it actually relates also to what you're saying, because color and the things that we're looking for to diagnose are not so much about the mind wants to make a little graph and go, red means this, orange means this, yellow means that. It likes to kind of put it out in a way that turns it into data that is always predictable. And in the creative process, color and light are fluid and mean different things to different people and different cultures and different moments. But what you can look for is what has life and aliveness. So gold and yellow has a radiance, has a vitality. Black has, in this context, a sense of death. So looking for where you see the life force energy. And that's why the arts and color and music and all of those things can be so valuable for healing, because they carry a vibration, they carry an energy that on a subconscious, unconscious, and outside the conscious mind level influence our consciousness. And so if we surround ourselves with vibrant colors, with light, with things that lift our spirits, then, as Yogananda says, environment is stronger than will. When we walk into these places, when we feel ourselves in these environments, something inside of us lifts up. And that principle applies with any of the artwork and creative process that you're doing in the process of healing. So there's a moment in which you're allowing yourself to diagnose, which means let everything that needs to be spoken by the psyche come forth. If it's black, if it's red, if it's intense, we need to see it, right? We need to accurately see it. We can't go, oh no, none of that for me, only pink and white, But there's also a moment when we need to pull up and galvanize our intention and say, I choose pink and white in this moment. I'm just using this as an example, but you get my point. I choose this now to flood and saturate the tissues of my body and being with light. And then that color allows that to flow, that energy itself, that prana, that life force energy to flow through us and to heal.
Well, Dana, I would like to ask if you could share a few stories, let's say, of how now you've already shared some, and thank you very much for sharing that personal story too. But let's say if we are thinking of creativity a little bit, going back to that theme, It can be expressed through painting, through music. I was also thinking, as you were describing earlier, of this getting over a certain inhibition or letting the prana or the energy flow, letting feeling more fluid in yourself, more less inhibited. I was thinking of dancing, but then
Mhm.
even perhaps sculpting and other arts come in the same flow. It kind of gives us an outlet, perhaps, to express what's happening inside. Can you think of a story or two for us all to listen where either of these modalities led to that awareness in a person, perhaps who was working under you, with you, or any story you've read where it led to a healing process on an emotional level, or something perhaps as dramatic as your own recovery at that time?
Mhm. Okay, let me introduce that by acknowledging that all of the forms of the arts are equally available as an access point. So whether you're working with clay or collage or dance or music or theater or painting or any of these, the arts are actually important and helpful because they access creativity. And so I want to make a distinction between art and creativity, because creativity is that open flowing state. And sort of miraculously and wonderfully and as a gift to humanity, the arts can catalyze that creative state. But so can other things. The creative state is the open, fluid, flowing state. And so time in nature or meditation or yoga, those can all catalyze that creative state that then gets applied in all the different ways. And it makes a difference in everything about the way you move, the way you interact, the way that you work with a child. And I want to give an example of how creativity even shows up in how you're working with a child. Because what creativity does is it opens you to experience what is in the moment and what is real in front of you, and have a very huge, broad perspective of possibility rather than coming from habit and what's been done before. And so there was a woman who was a school teacher and working with children. And she found, after having opened her creative state, that she could go in and experience things that were happening in the classroom very differently. And here's one particular example. So there's these two kids that are having a conflict, and they're going, so he said this, and she said that, and he did this, and she did that. And so at that moment, the mind wants to go, all right, well, what happened first, and who really did something, and try to figure out what actually happened so we can then know what to do about it, right? Well, being relaxed in her being open to the creative flow, she was like, let me just experience this. And in that intuitive state, she could just know they were both exhausted. And so she just said to them, would you like to take a nap? That was it. I mean, here they are in the middle of a conflict, right? She's like, would you like to take a nap? And they were like, yeah. Because it's different than it opens you to experience reality in all of its possibilities and to experience it intuitively, to perceive in the moment what is really happening. Let's get outside, below and above and around that little part of us, that's the mental part that has so many habits that just go, this is what we need to do. And creativity brings us into the moment. And that's the miracle point, is the now, the present. And then you can be present with your presence. And that brings being into this world. And it allows the divine presence to arrive inside of us and in the situation.
Well, thank you, Dana. This reminded me, we on India time today morning had a wonderful interview with Dr. Dean Ornish, the world famous cardiologist, and we'll be broadcasting, friends, that recording for those of you who are watching from the US. That he was sharing that one of the modalities of how he has not just managed but shown over the decades that advanced cardiac disease, coronary artery disease, can be reversed is love. And he said in the beginning, when he was proposing this, in the 1970s, that work on your feelings or emotions, people were like, give me a break. Are you saying loving is going to reverse my blocked arteries. And he said he had some convincing to do to people to get into the research, and then the research spoke for itself. But it made me think of what you just shared, that sometimes on a surface level, the problem can be very complex. It gets more and more entangling, but it requires somebody, and in this case, let's say Dr. Dean Ornish was, simple-minded to see that maybe at the heart of, the heart problem is people are not noticing that. Why not simplify my lifestyle? Why not focus on the basics instead of always waiting for something latest out there, which is going to be the miracle cure, which is wonderful if it comes. But also, we sometimes ignore that all we need is a good night's sleep or a nap right now instead of complicating things. Thank you so much for sharing how creativity on the teacher's behalf or her relaxation led to that. Would you like to take
Yeah.
that?
So another thing, Dana, which I was seeing that in this online, in this global health retreat, we are trying to see well-being from all dimensions, mental, emotional, spiritual. So this question was coming to my mind, that if you could throw some light upon this, that how creativity can help someone who is, let's say, battling with anxiety or depression, or let's say fear. Would you like to recommend them to a specific sort of creativity that could help them, or maybe a kind of painting or a specific kind of creative expression that could help them come out of that scenario?
Yes, I think that generally a lot of the depression and anxiety and situations like that are tensions on a certain level. You can see them as tensions and constrictions, and often kind of exacerbated by a mental process that is looping a little bit. And so creative energy shifts us into states that are more saturated with the presence that is loving and gentle and calm. And so one key I would say for really across the board for all of us is actually accessing that state quickly and easily through the body. Because when we get depressed, anxious, fearful, all these things, we get literally physically tight. We constrict, we get rigid, we get tight. And even before anything I do in any of my classes, like painting or sculpting or whatever, we almost always start with a guided moving meditation, which is just basically putting on beautiful, uplifting music, closing your eyes and letting yourself breathe and move to that music, as if you're just, fronds in the ocean, and let yourself feel the energy of the music. In minutes, you're shifted. In minutes, you have gotten out of this and you're feeling a flow. From that, the modality is not so important. One person might benefit from clay, another person from paint, someone else from music. It just really varies, and each of those modalities could be a way. So I wouldn't prescribe that specifically, but I do think that the body is the kinesthetic shift, the somatic shift is a real catalyst point for that opening. It's kind of like it gets us back into the child state, because the early childhood is very body-centered, body awareness. And when we just come back into our body and allow it to move and give it that freedom of movement, it just miraculously and instantly shifts us out of mental static into presence and being. And then with that, sometimes, like when you're doing an expressive arts healing or therapy process, sometimes people need to just sort of shake and stomp and, let some energy move that has been stuck. And then what often happens is that just follows a natural course. The energy comes through, it becomes intense, it's released, and then it becomes calm and starts to flow. And so it's sort of allowing that which has been compressed and repressed and suppressed to be freed into flow. And the flow has energy. This is what Swami Kriyananda taught me, is that energy has an intelligence of its own. And so that's a remarkable understanding that when we allow the prana, the life force energy to flow, we don't have to direct it and say, could you go over there to my vascular system and work on that for a minute? We don't have to tell it what to do. We don't have to know. All we have to do is open to the flow. And when we open to the flow, that divine intelligence knows exactly what it needs to do. It knows exactly where it needs to go. And so sometimes it's good to draw back from all the specifics and the detailed analysis and come to something, as you were saying, Dr. Aditya, very simple. What is simple? I need to breathe. I need to sleep. I need to have something warm and nourishing to eat. And I need to just be present with myself. And being present with yourself is intrinsically healing.
Yeah. What I'm also hearing over here, and I want to but say it aloud and correct me if I'm wrong over here, Dana, is again when we think of arts or creativity, many times the mind gives up right at the first in the beginning that I'm not good at it, or will I have to be a genius to access that level of energy? But what I'm hearing from your explanation is make a beginning, get some clay, get some body moving, get some art going, and as you feel better, more energy would be unleashed and a more calming influence would come. That's
yes, let me jump right in there, because I think that our culture has a grave misunderstanding that kind of puts together art and creativity as if artists are the ones who can be creative and that you have to be really good in art in order to be creative. Being good in any of these modalities, painting, sculpture, clay, collage, whatever I've mentioned, is not at all the point. It's actually completely irrelevant. So when we do this work, your capacity, your talent, your experience in being able to do art doesn't matter at all, because we're not in the creative process as a healing modality concerned with the products, and it's concerned with the product and making a pretty picture and making the perfect sculpture. That puts us right in the mind. That takes us out of the soul space into the mental sphere where you're perfecting it. Now, it's a longer conversation about the role of the artist and the arts, because that's also important. But please, let's separate that from creativity, because creativity is a core capacity. And in this time period, particularly in the world as we know it right now, with change happening at an exponential rate, where a person in kindergarten is probably going to have a career in a field that does not yet exist, where everything is changing so fast, one of the core survival skills is creativity. And we cannot keep equating creativity with being able to be a fine art painter, because it's not the same. We need everybody to be creative. We need everybody accessing that creativity. The arts help catalyze creativity. So that's why I use them, because they are fast track into the creative state. But I just want to make that distinction. It's not the same. It's that they're useful tools for activating a very innate, intrinsic human state of consciousness called creativity.
That's amazing. I mean, this is a little bit going into the realm actually of education, but it gives me as a doctor so much hope that, let's say, if that attitude or how to tap into creativity is taught in school, just like you said, if there's going to be somebody's career is not even existing right now, but it's going to be their career in 10, 12 years, because many kids, millions perhaps, are having the anxiety of, how do they move into the world now, especially a world which is now, again, so challenged economically and such. And again, in time, we know those are the exact things which lead to physical manifestations of illness, stress, basically, which now has been tied with cancer for the last 5 years, even by WHO. So all these things are a continuum over here. So thank you so much for that insight, Dana. Yeah,
can I say one more thing, or do I have time? Imagine a child in school, and imagine approaching it outside in. And they're like, okay, we don't know what your career is going to be, so you better train in this, and you better learn this, and you better learn that, and you better do, because we don't know, and it's scary, and we have to make sure you're prepared. Just imagine the energy of stress involved in that. And in fact, it probably won't work because we can't predict, and something will open up that wasn't any of that. And, it's not even very helpful. But imagine that same child in school going, and the approach being, we don't know what the future's going to bring, but we do know that you'll be able to do well with it if you have inner connection to your own self, if you have resilience, if you have creativity, if you have a sensibility that allows you to interact with the world and grow and learn and have an aliveness inside, then no matter what happens, you will be prepared. And that child being taught with that underlying approach and energy, how are they going to feel? Spacious, relaxed, able to experience and respond appropriately to whatever is down the road.
And I'll add one phrase before Amar takes the next question. They'll be at ease and never this ease, which is exactly what we're trying to find a solution out of.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm seeing the future hospitals or maybe wellness centers will have place for artists and musicians too, because the kind of healing modality they can bring to that center as a holistic way. Because in the morning also, as I was listening to Dr. Dean Ornish's talk, he said, I don't see myself as a technician. I see myself as a healer. And I think the modern medicine has to see that more and more now, and it is now evolving also, that that diagnostics and drugs and medicines and procedures, yes, they will have their place, but at the same time, that healing touch, which can be received through the doctors and physicians, it is not only limited to them, but the spectrum is wide. That yesterday we had a wonderful talk with Dr. Donatella. She's from Italy, and she's also a neurologist, where she was doing and she was sharing her research that how music has been seen to help patients, those who were battling with Parkinsonism or let's say multiple sclerosis and so many other very advanced illnesses. And so I'm seeing, I think, with your talk that the kind of glimpse of the future has started pouring in, and the future wellness centers will have a touch of all of that. But the other thing which I would like to know from you is that, again, I'm going back to Swami Kriyananda, who was our mentor too, and you shared his inspiration in your art and creativity. Often he used to remind us that, and he himself was a composer, as we know, he composed a lot of music and wrote wonderful books, that he used to say that everything has vibrations, and everything, even art pieces, have vibration too. They have the consciousness in them. So he used to encourage people that whatever art pieces they bring into their homes, they should uplift their consciousness. It should not be that just because an art piece is more popular or it has been done by a popular artist, that doesn't make it very valid or very healing. So I would like you to just throw some light on that if you have to recommend a person what kind of art pieces they should bring in their homes, how would that be?
Well, I think the key, again, is not in having, the mind would like to write a little book and say, use this kind and by this artist and these colors and this composition, because it wants to analyze and make a set of rules. But what it's really about is each one of us becoming open and aware and intelligent in the realm of vibration. Because if we walk into our house and we look on the wall and we see, oh, here's this painting that I got from my great Aunt Hilda, who was depressed her whole life, and it's depressing too, but I have it on my wall because it was from great Aunt Hilda or whatever. We start to open our minds and analyze, what is my response to this? What is my response to this color? What happens when I clutter my house? What happens when I keep it simple? It's much more important that we become agents of consciousness that are able to perceive the vibratory realities, perceive the energetic effect of those vibratory realities, than it is for us to have a recipe about what it is we should and shouldn't have in our rooms. Because once we open our consciousness and start to perceive, it will be so obvious. If you walk into a dark, stark, gray steel building with very little light and no art, You're going to feel it. The only reason we're not feeling it is we're trapped in the mind. We're going around in stiff bodies, mentally locked. That's the general culture in our time. I'm sorry, modern life is like stuck in the head and tense in the body. And so once we open our consciousness, we will be able to really feel and know this doesn't make me feel good. I need to eliminate it. Listening to this music makes me angry. Why am I listening to it? Listening to this music makes me feel inspired. Why shouldn't I listen to that? And so that's what I would recommend. And it's down to everything we've been saying. It's education system from zero on. We have a new paradigm emerging here, and we got to jump on it. And it means no longer trying to figure out things from outside in. It means go to the center and feel it and experience it from inside out. And when we do that, very many things that were complex become very simple and obvious. And so that's what I would encourage people to do. Open your consciousness and really pay attention. How does this affect me?
Basically, what you're saying, Dana, is increase your awareness. As our awareness increases, we will start noticing things around us, and then we can take corrective measures over there.
And live more
yes.
in the heart and feel
more in the heart and
rather than, I think, analyzing. We have to feel more and then see how it is inspiring us or not.
And pay attention. And of course you can become aware. As that happens, you'll start to become more and more aware of what's the source. Okay, was this created by someone of a high consciousness, or was this created by a suicidal artist? Because it could be that in what's given, the vibration and consciousness of the person who's creating it also comes through. And so all of that comes into play. We will become much more discriminating and much more savvy about it. And it will lead us to seek out the highest source of inspiration, the highest font. What is the vitality and radiance level of what it is that we're perceiving? We'll start to look at it not like, oh, what is the composition? I think it needs a little more red over here. Or, we'll start to think, what am I feeling and what am I experiencing? And how does my consciousness either expand or contract? That was something Swami Kriyananda made very clear, like pay attention. Does the energy go up your spine or down? Do you open and become more alive? Do you become sunken and concave? Does your consciousness become broader and you include more reality in it and other people's reality and broader perspectives? Or does your consciousness become narrow? And that is our kind of inner guidance system. And if we start paying attention to that directly, then all of these other things are going to adjust and become, taken care of, like the ancient and enduring truth. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these other things are added unto you. There's a very profound truth in that. Go for what is core, at the center, at the innermost of your own being. Align there, and all of these other things adjust into place.
Well, friends, I have one word to say. It's something I'm going to practice myself. Next week, you're going to get the recordings of all the talks over these 3 days so far, and tomorrow too. I'm going to go back and study this talk many times over. There were so many beautiful things you shared, Dana, over there, which I think makes sense right now. And of course, one would have to think, because remember I said in the beginning, I'm going to ask you a question: what color should be my room? But now it's like, I know you have guidelines and there are wonderful colors you could suggest, just like the beautiful ones you are having in your own room and studio over there. But it also, like you're saying, comes down to an individual need. What is your need? Develop that awareness. Perhaps
Exactly.
that need changes with time, and makes me want to delve more deeply in this subject.
And how it is
Yay!
Yes.
And on that note, actually, friends, I'd also like to tell you that after this weekend program, stay in tune, stay in touch with us. We'll be sending you feedback forms. We'll be asking from you, how could we serve you better throughout this coming year? And we'd be very happy to get in touch with our teachers, with our speakers, with Dana Andersen over here to see how we can perhaps even do some experiential workshops so that we can start again moving closer to the truths and realities Dana has presented here with us. Well, Dana, thank you so much for your extensive sharing, the wisdom you have brought after decades of practicing these things, for sharing some of your beautiful personal stories over there. And I think it has infused, certainly enlightened Dr. Amar and myself, and has brought hope to many people for a field and for a theme, creativity, which we often don't think of as a modality for healing, but you kind of brought it to our attention that it is the primary principle, which it's like a doctor or a researcher creating a new drug, which leads to so many wonderful things to happen. So how a patient perhaps or a person who is seeking greater health has the same responsibility to unleash that side in themselves, to open up that side in themselves.
Yes, thank you. And tomorrow there's a workshop if people want to try it too.
Oh, wonderful. So we'll post the information for that, friends, in our comment section. If you have any
Thank you.
questions for Dana, please share with us. And Dana, once again, have a wonderful evening, as they say. Buonasera to you. Wonderful evening. And thank you, friends. Stay in tune with us. We are now going to move into our next topic for this evening. Thank you.
Yay.